Hi, I'm Jake Boston-Kemper, Director of Agronomy and Research here at Liqui-Grow.
I'm Phil Long, Regional Agronomist here at Liqui-Grow.
Hi, Abby Ingalls, Regional Sales Manager.
Hi, I'm Katie Hess, Director of Sales and Marketing here at Liqui-Grow, and today we're bringing you a year of review in 2025. We are putting a little special twist on that, though. See, we've kind of coined this phrase, the liquid advantage, and so when we offer products, if we offer management styles or anything of those sorts, we often talk about the liquid advantage. So we're going to go through the 2025 growing season of regular traditional management practices, and if folks would have maybe gone the liquid advantage route, what they maybe would have seen. So things to think about as we go into 2026. So to kind of kick this thing off, let's start about planting season and some of the challenges we saw and some of the great things that happened throughout planting season. Who wants to start this? Of course.
Can I start?
Yes, you will let you start.
Okay, the first thing that I recall about the planting season, in a big way, is that we were warm, and this was down at Roseville. We were warm, but we were warm across the geography. There was lots of planters starting to go in the field. This was the second week in April, roughly, a little earlier than we normally would get started, generally speaking, and there were a lot of planters going. But we were calling for a wet, cold spell. It was coming, and it was forecasted. And I had several growers and salesmen that I talked to regularly calling me, you think we should stop planting before this cold front? Because of course we're worried about inhibitional chilling injury. We know that just because the soils are warm doesn't mean that you should continue planting if the forecast is colder temperatures, cooling soils, and rain in particular, right? Mm-hmm. That can cause inhibitional chilling injury. And so my general recommendation was, yes, you need to stop planting roughly 24 hours before this cold front sets in. Now, what did I do, Phil?
Kept planting.
I kept planting. I kept planting because these small plots are a little different, and my financial livelihood isn't based on the small plots either, right? Because if I get stuck at a location, I could be stuck there for a week and a half, 2 weeks, and that's not a good day. So I actually did keep planting, despite that I was telling people not to keep planting. But I will tell you, that caused some problems. It did.
No way, you don't say.
Yeah. I will tell you that I was disappointed in the uniform emergence of that stand. It was okay, but I will tell you, when I looked at it at emergence, there were some places where stand wasn't the best, and it was definitely much more uneven than I would have liked. So we tell people we give people this advice for reasons, right? So that was a lesson. And I did a study several years ago where we actually planted at different times before a cold front come in, and sure enough, in one hybrid we had some big time injury and damage.
Yeah, I think that was up in Clear Lake.
That was up in Clear Lake. So, when we tell people and we advise people, we're doing it for good reason, and sometimes those lessons are learned hard. Again, good thing I wasn't dependent on my income, and it turned out okay. But if I'd have planted 300, 400 acres in front of that I was counting on yielding well, wouldn't have been the best scenario.
Yeah, and I feel like growers usually see some of that coming. It's always just a question of whether to stop or not. We always have that. We start planting much earlier than we used to, and a lot of it's due to genetics and so forth. But we also have timeliness to get in the field, and when you start that early, if you see that coming, it's put the brakes on, or sit back and do something else for a few days and get past that, especially for corn.
Yeah, particularly for corn. And since you brought that up, we were at the ICM conferences. You've probably seen this, but Dr. Laura Lindsay, she's the soybean extension specialist with Ohio State. They showed a planting date study where they had corn and soybean in the same field. And what they showed is that soybean actually had more consistent higher yields when planted early than corn. And that's because corn can be very sensitive to things like inhibitional chilling injury and even emergence. And soybean, not that you want to do something stupid, but if you're unsure if this is a good day to plant corn, you might be better off to plant soybean, because inhibitional chilling injury, and by the way, it's not that soybeans can't get inhibitional chilling injury, they can, but it's just that if you lose 5,000, 10,000 plants per acre, it's probably not the end of the world, and if they come up uneven, it's also probably not the end of the world.
Yeah, exactly. On the flip side of soybeans, though, we had a little bit different issue, but it was still weather related, and that was crusting issues. And I think we all saw a lot of that this spring, and there was a lot of different, I'll say, scenarios from my area over to the east side. But crusting in soybeans is a big thing, and withstand loss can make it even worse. But whenever you have narrow rows, so 15s or 10s or whatever, if you have narrow row soybeans, they don't have that pushing power. Soybeans have a lot of ability to push up through a crust, but when they're in 15s or narrow rows, they're spaced further apart. So they can't push up through that, and I saw that in a lot of cases, the 15-inch beans, which I love 15-inch beans, because they can be quicker, easier weed control, a lot of things, but they don't have the ability to push through a crust. And there was a lot of rotary hose running in our area in north central Iowa this spring on corn and beans. But there was a lot of crusting issues across our territory.
Yeah, I think they've said that this was one of the higher replant year for soybeans. So guys were going in and spotting in some beans across the geography. So yeah, it was a lot of issues from an emergence standpoint. So it kind of leads into yield then at the end of the year, and maybe some of the factors that people forgot about.
Exactly. Yeah, and I mean, I even myself did some replanting, and that's the nice thing about beans. They have some flexibility to be able to replant, throw some in there. You know, we don't usually say that with corn. You can't just spike it in next to it. But yeah, at least we can make up for a little bit of that stand, and like Jake was mentioning earlier, I mean, soybeans can tolerate some of that decrease in stand, but it's a matter of weed control at that point. So.
Yeah.
The other thing that I kind of briefly remember seeing physically by walking a number of fields and viewing my own research plots and talking to people is that the corn in general, I'm not saying this is the case everywhere, I'm just saying as a general comment, the corn was much more uneven than we like, the evenness and emergence. And some of that could have been caused by an inhibitional chilling injury, some of that could have been caused by the crusting. And I know for a fact that I had some crusting at the second side I planted at the end of April. And I know that crusting event, I ended up with a decent stand, but I know that crusting event caused a decent amount of unevenness in corn. And I know, even though we had excellent yield, we ended up having excellent yields, I know that cost me. Mm-hmm. You know, you can't predict a crust necessarily. If you have a lot of crusting issues, there are some things you can think about to reduce crusting, like changing tillage practices, which I don't know if we want to get into all that, but if you have more questions about that, I suppose you can reach out to Phil or I, because we like to talk about that.
And with the soybean side, obviously, there's a lot of, in our area, there's a lot more land rollers being used, which does break down some of that aggregate structure on the top. And when it gets hit by these heavy rain events, which we're going to talk more about, because that was kind of the theme, in my opinion, at least in our area, heavy, hard rain events caused a lot of challenges this year. That can make it really hard for corn or beans to get out of the ground. And not to mention residue, there's soil types and residue that can cause uneven emergence, and just handling the amount of residue that we have, especially if it's corn on corn. So a lot of factors come into play, but we have that every year. So it's just a matter of managing each year differently and what the year is going to throw at you.
So as we think about, emergence in soybeans, one of the things that we changed in accordance to the Liquid Advantage is our new seed treatment, providing more of an energy source, providing more of a food mechanism to the plant. Do you guys want to elaborate on what that looks like as we go into the 26 growing season?
I will just say that when it comes to the change in our seed treatment offering, that I know Ashley and I worked very closely together to evaluate some different packages. And I strongly believe that we went to a program that has a wider range in the common pests that we have in our geography. So there are all kinds of
Seedling diseases.
there are seedling diseases, Fusarium, Phytophthora, Rhizoctonia. And Ashley and I sat down and looked really closely at some different active ingredients. And at the end of the day, we feel like we're going to have better control on some early season insect pests, primarily bean leaf beetle. Oftentimes we think about bean leaf beetle causing a little bit of injury at V1, V2, and it's not hurting anything. And that's not completely unfounded. It's not hurting anything isn't completely incorrect. It's not hurting anything from a defoliation perspective. But you could be getting bean pod mottle virus because soybean beetles vector bean pod mottle virus. So I would argue that early feeding is not a good thing in soybean. And we went to an insecticide that we believe is going to have stronger residual activity to help with that. We also changed up some fungicide actives to get us a broader spectrum of control on some important fungal disease, root diseases in soybean.
With a micronutrient package included in
Yep.
it as well.
Yep.
So really a nice benefit for growers as we think about that 26 after we learned from, this last year and prior years, making sure we catered that offering to really fit the need for our growers.
Yeah, and not that our other seed treatment package was bad, but it's always a good idea to review things and try to make sure that we're doing the best job that we can.
Absolutely.
And that's the nice part is we can do that. We're, our territory, we can focus on, like you said, the specific diseases that our customers face the most. And, when it comes to having a nice seed treatment, that's what allows us to maybe plant a little bit earlier on the soybean side as everybody's pushing that envelope. You got to have that seed treatment.
I'll have to ask Ashley, but I think the Liqui-Grow Blue is going to be better too.
Oh, yeah.
That's good.
It's going to be sharp.
Yeah.
So Phil, this seems like a good time while we're on the soybean topic to kind of throw out a little teaser for one of our other lead academies. We have some IDC research that you and Jake have recently started. Do you want to tell the folks a little bit more about that and how it fits into our liquid advantage?
Sure, I'll try to be brief. But so Jake and I tried to tackle one of the common challenges we have up in north central Iowa. High pH soils, a lot of factors that go into iron deficiency, chlorosis, and soybeans, but it can be a huge detriment. And this year, for sure, we saw it. Some years it's much worse than others, but you can easily lose, 50% of your yield, and those spots are really tough for not having iron available to the soybeans. Soybeans need iron. So we used our exact strip technology and did some trials with that. And I will say which we'll talk about more, but the results are pretty outstanding in terms of comparing that back to kind of an industry standard chelate in furrow. We were able to easily come right up to that, if not a little bit over, in terms of yield benefit. So
That might have been my favorite experiment.
And the fun part
You
about
can
it,
actually pick one. They're like your kids. You're not supposed to pick a favorite, Jake. They're all
That
good.
was a pretty good one.
the fun part about IDC is you usually visually see it, and this we definitely saw. We captured the right spot. The researchers in the right spot, and it was very visual when we were doing our exact strip applications that it was showing up. So.
Yep.
That's great. Okay, so we moved out of the planting season, and then we kind of got that late May, June timeframe. I remember doing a video with you, Phil. It was kind of cold that day. We still had our jackets on, and we were talking about weed control in corn, and then also metabolizing chemistry through the corn. And we were talking about if it was going to rain, because we were pending this rain coming, and look at your.
And honestly, I have a better memory than I do, but. Honestly, it was a drier start, and then we obviously changed pretty quickly, but had pretty warm conditions, and unfortunately, usually that plays into the hand for weeds because most of the weeds that we have trouble with can take off a lot faster than our corn and beans can. They can utilize that little bit of heat that they have if there's not a canopy shading them out, and I think this year we kind of like the previous year. We had some escapes and challenges, especially on the soybean side. I would say in general on both sides, but residuals and so forth. It depends what kind of program you had down there. And I think some of the ones that didn't have residuals down stuff showed this year. There was some big challenges in fields across our territory with weed control on the soybean side. Things got out of hand and trying to rescue, which obviously started at that early season with, there's just a lot of logistical challenges. Everybody has to make those decisions, but I think this year it showed up pretty big, trying to control it after the fact, kind of like a fungicide application. You can't play catch up with some of these weeds.
Yep, and we talked about residuals and the importance of residuals earlier this morning in a different Lead Academy session, and if you want to learn more about that, you should definitely watch another Lead Academy session where we went into great detail about effective weed management controls in soybean in particular, particularly with Waterhemp.
And Phil, you make a great point, right? Is challenges with herbicide and weed control management, the most important way to control weeds is to never see them emerge at all. So reference that video. Jake goes into great detail of why the populations have become more pressure and later into the growing season. But what we want to do and how we work with our growers is making sure we never see weeds emerge, right? Then that becomes a very challenging application, can be a little bit more costly at that point. So we want to use multiple mode of actions to control weeds, never allow them to germinate. But great information. Yeah, great reflection on the year.
You know, Phil keeps talking about all this rainfall we had, and as I sit here and think, I mowed the yard like every other day. All
The
summer
big
long.
highlight of 25.
Until Labor Day.
Until
That was
la-
the key.
I
It
think
never
even-
stopped.
It never stopped. I mean, we literally mowed the yard every other day, it seemed like. And that's all we talked about. Did you mow today? Yeah, let's mow tomorrow. So anyway, let's talk about that and how that affected the crops this year throughout the growing season and some of the choices we had to make.
Yeah, I definitely gotta represent, the Clear Lake area especially got hit hard. We'll talk about yields, but that area up there, it's a prairie pothole region for a reason. They have potholes and those areas don't drain that well. We had in June and July alone, I had it wrote down here, June and July alone, we had 17 inches of rain, but the key was the number of rainfall events that were over a half inch. It was more than half of them. In the month of July, it was more than half of them that were over a half inch, and some of them were an inch and a half, 2 inches. And you just, in those regions, you can't recover. Those Okoboji soils, those soils at the bottom of the topography cannot recover because that's why they have high organic matter. They sit there saturated, and and although we have a lot of tile, it just there's a
Has nowhere to
limitation.
go.
It has nowhere to go, and if you're low in the landscape, that's going to be the last to drain. So, yeah, a lot of those areas never recover. We're never able to replant. Some of them might have tried, but they never got that chance in 2025 because it just never stopped raining. Didn't. Those
So we
ponds never
sometimes
went
talk about nitrogen management and, split applying our nitrogen throughout the season. So how did that, work this year with all of this rainfall and these large rainfall events?
You want to take this one, Jake? Or you want me to-
Oh, yeah. It's not just because I work for a company that sells a lot of UAN. It's because I truly believe that split nitrogen applications is a very, very effective way to hedge your risk against wet conditions. And I do understand that when you get wet, sometimes it's hard to get back in and make that side dress application. And that's why I think you as a grower need to have a plan on how are you going to get that done. If you have a plan with one of our retailers, they recognize that you're going to side dress no matter what. They're going to make sure either they have the equipment that they can physically do it for you, that you have a plan to use a side dress applicator, maybe you buy a side dress applicator. The point is that I highly believe in split nitrogen applications for the farmer's bottom line, for the environment, but the key is you have to have a plan. If you don't have a plan and you get into one of these seasons where it's extremely wet and you wished you'd side dressed, you're not going to be first on the list to get done. You're going to come in last. You're going to call in, hey, I'd really like to side dress this year. Well, guess what? All of our normal side dressers, we had a plan. They're first on the list. You're going to be last on the list. And then the question is, are we going to get there in time, or are you going to be able to get it done in time to meet the needs of the crop? If you have to wait for it to dry out, if it dries out, are you going to be able to get in and get it done timely? I don't know. So I just think in general that side dressing in wet years like this can pay big dividends. Does it pay every year? No, it doesn't. But you want to capture those circumstances, those instances where it does pay big time. And in a lot of cases, I'm sure that would have been the case in 2025.
The key you said was be prepared and be ready. And there was more instances than I would want to share of guys that didn't have a lot on up front, or in some cases any up front, and we're trying to figure out when they could get back in. There's a lot of late side dress. The kind where you're going in with a tractor and you're pushing it over to the point you're not sure if you're going to snap it or not, because once corn starts taking off, you got to get it done.
Yeah.
So, yeah, having the plan, I think, is a good learning thing from 2025.
And of course, the other thing we need to keep in mind when it comes to end-loss, there's a reason why we promote instinct. There's a reason why we're doing a lot of active research looking at how much does ATS reduce nitrification inhibition. And that just means you want to keep the nitrogen in the ammonium form and don't let it get in the nitrate form. So both instinct and ATS to some extent can help do that. you do want to have someone up front for sure, right? And you might want to have a lot on up front if it's continuous corn, but you want to protect those nitrogen applications too, because you don't know when it's going to get wet.
Yeah, so it was cool, right? So we were rainy. We had cooler temperatures. I remember going to the Jones County Fair and wearing pants, which is unusual. It's rare,
I always
right?
wear pants at all county fairs.
That's
just
well,
FYI.
that's not. There's a lot of people in dresses, Jake. We don't have to wear pants. But this year we
I
did.
think she's referring to wearing like shorter type, not or longer.
Let's start this session over. All right, Phil, you made a great point. It was wet. It was a little bit cooler. I remember going to a lot of these county fairs and people were not wearing shorts, were wearing jeans. It was, these cooler temperatures really led into maybe some disease pressure.
Well, hold on a second. Before we get to disease pressure, I always wear jeans at all county fairs. Doesn't matter how hot or cold it is. Even in Missouri, when it's 105, I wear jeans.
Well, you'd look pretty silly wearing your cowboy boots and shorts, don't you think?
Well, it depends on who you ask.
Never seen you in shorts. So I can't-
Now we know why.
Yeah.
Gonna throw that out.
Oh.
But I mean, you
you know,
make a
it-
great point about that. You did take your jacket with you for most of the county fairs early on.
Yeah, so maybe at this low temperatures, did it set us up for more disease pressure in corn and soybeans than what we normally see, or specific pressures?
And I think the rain events, we were just at the ICM conference as well, and Allison Robertson laid out a pretty good argument as to why, we saw so much southern rust, which we're going to talk about. And it had a lot to do with the heavy rainfall events that we had. And when I look back, the amount of relative humidity that was above 85%, we always talk about leaf wetness. It's pretty easy to get 7-8 hours of leaf wetness when it's that wet all night and most of the day.
Well, let's break this down a little bit. Let's start with tar spot, kind of what Abby referred to. Let's kind of hit some of these diseases individually. So let's talk tar spot
Yeah,
first.
and I know for a fact, in Roseville, we had some pretty early reports of tar spot. I don't want to say the exact date, but it was in roughly the middle of June.
I could probably tell you.
We
Keep
had tar
talking.
spot reported in Roseville, and again, that's because it was cool. And tar spot likes temperatures that are a little bit more cooler than we normally have, and it was wet. It was cool and wet.
June 23rd at 7:29 in the morning, I got my first photo of tar spot.
First photo of tar
first
spot. Yeah. So it was in roughly the middle of June, which is pretty early for tar spot to come on, and that's concerning because if it comes on that early, the population of the inoculums can build to pretty high levels by the end of the season, and it did. And it did.
Well, and that was the question that we continually got is, okay, we're seeing it now. How bad is it going to get? Is the heat going to burn it off? Are we going to see it keep growing?
I think in general the heat slowed it down, thank the Lord, because if it had stayed cool like that, it would have been really bad. It was bad enough as it was. It got pretty bad in places, but luckily it heated up because it did slow it down some.
Sure.
Yeah, definitely likes those more mild conditions, and that's from the year before when we were all worried about disease. I mean, that's the key, especially between southern rust and tar spot. One took off, and tar spot kind of slowed down. Southern rust took advantage of the hot.
So as we think about tar spot, right, we had conditions for it to set up. It does overwinter in Iowa. So as we're thinking about management, how do we tie this into our decision making for 26?
Yeah, I back in 1819 when we first got tar spot, I think it was it's got to be this triangle of disease. We got to have all three come together to make tar spot happen, and now we know that that's not the case. The primary pathogen for tar spot overwinters in the residue, so that really should be the one that we're focused on, in my opinion. It's there, and it's probably the most detrimental, year in, year out, given our conditions.
So if you see it in your field this year, odds are you're going to have it next year in a cornfield again.
The question is just how much and how bad. That's the question.
So what Abby's saying is, how do you set yourself up for the best success, or do you just plan a fungicide?
Yeah, I mean, you need to plan on a fungicide. Have a plan in place, because I talked to a lot of guys that unfortunately maybe didn't have that plan, and they waited till probably R3, R4, early to mid August. And some of those folks unfortunately sprayed twice, and that second pass probably didn't pay because they were trying to play catch up. And Purdue, actually, they have a rule of thumb that once it gets to the top 5% of the plant, so top couple leaves, you can't play catch up. You're not going to regain any yield. You can't play catch up at that point. And I talked to a lot of those people that are like, okay, it's time to spray a fungicide now. It's getting bad. Southern rust and tar spot in some situations. And at that point, it was too late. So you got to plan on that R1 time frame like we always talk about. This year, again, from the early reports that I've seen, R1 is obviously paid big. And then those that sprayed R1 and then another pass still saw some benefit to that. But if you waited till R3 or after and sprayed, you couldn't catch up to it, the southern rust and tar spot.
So southern rust. Remember, some of those dirty rains. We had a lot of weather patterns shifting up from the south. That's where it comes from. It comes from down south. We've seen a lot more corn acres down in Texas, so it could be, part of why we saw this year. Is that something that we need to be making our fungicide plans on, or do we think that was such an anomaly that we're not going to see it next year? How do we know? How do we judge this?
Yeah, unfortunately, like anything in agronomy, it's a lot of factors. So I don't want to
never
get
easy
too.
answers,
It's not.
though.
I can't just say yes or no, unfortunately, but it's not built into me. But yes, I do think the southerly, winds were a big factor, and there was a dome of heat that came over us in June. It was like in the 90s, and everybody was like, "Why is it so hot?"
Yeah.
And we have a lot more corn acres in the U.S. And I heard from talk last week that Allison Robertson gave that. A lot of those folks down south weren't spraying. So we had a lot more inoculum that got up and pushed up from those southerly winds. Typically we see this disease come up from more from the southeast from a hurricane. That's not what's happened the last 2 years. It's come up more from that Texas, coming from Mexico, obviously. I want to make sure we state that. It does not overwinter here. It has to survive on a corn plant. So where's corn in the wintertime right now? Mexico.
So you're saying
That's where I wanna be
it has
too.
to be on a live from green tissue.
Yes.
Has to survive on green tissue, and it's not. The other question I've got quite a bit is, these rusts in the grass stuff. No, it's just southern rust. That single pathogen only survives on corn. Or it's not related to the rust that. I walked through a lot of grass this summer, and I think we all did, and got orange on our shoes. Yep. And that's not related. It's not like it moves from one to the other.
Interesting.
It doesn't overwinter. The southern rust that we have has to come up from the south every year.
Does southern rust favor corn on corn or corn on soybeans, or is it just it sees corn and it's going for it?
Because it doesn't overwinter here, it doesn't matter. So whether it's corn on corn or corn soybean, you're going to get southern rust if we get the inoculum blown up from the south. That's a great question. Because most foliar diseases do favor continuous corn because there's a very local source of inoculum there.
So
And-
how long will a fungicide hold off southern rust? Will it hold it off for the rest of the season?
Like if you apply it at BT?
Yeah.
No, it's not going to hold it off for the entire growing season. But all these diseases that reduce corn yield really bad, they have what they call a polycyclic disease cycle. So in other words, Katie, one spore, one lesion on a leaf will produce, let's just say, 100 spores for discussion purposes. And then those 100 spores will produce another 100 spores apiece. So I think that means you have 1,000 spores, or maybe it's 1,000,000, doesn't matter. The bottom line is disease ramps up rapidly. So when you apply a fungicide, what you do is you cut off that inoculum buildup much sooner, and you end up with a lot less inoculum at the end of the season. So you don't stop it, but you greatly reduce the inoculum load that would be there later in the season, if that makes sense.
And it's that cycle is within about 2 weeks, and a lot of our fungicides do best when applied early because they're stopping that spore germination. So if you let those spores germinate, they go out. You've probably seen southern rust. You see a lot of little yellow dots. That's like the early before the spores really show up, and you see that growth on the top of the leaf. That once it gets to that point, you've got a lot of spores coming out of there. So you're playing catch up already. Hopefully it's not on the whole plant, but yeah, that's going back to the point of planning ahead. You have to be ahead of diseases like that and tar spot because they're so quick, and you don't see them until it's too late. So you got to plan ahead.
Yeah, and Allison's data, you referenced it, Allison's data clearly showed that, she had different application timings and different application timings and then 2 applications. I don't think she had 3 applications, but basically, the VT applications, averaged across all of our data, produce the highest net return or produce the highest yield. We've seen that time and time and time again. Every year I get asked the question, should we be spraying at V15 as opposed to VT or R3 as opposed to VT? And sure, it can depend on the year, but it can depend. Sure, sometimes R3 applications were better, sometimes V15 applications were better, but on average, the VT applications always come out on top, and that's what we saw again in 2025. I mean, Allison's data showed that again. So I would just plan on making a VT application, again, being prepared, making sure that you're on a list, the area applicators can get to you timely, because the worst thing that could happen is you don't get it done until R3 or R4, and that happens in a lot of cases, particularly when we have a lot of disease because no one can get it done. So it's all about having a plan. It's all about having a plan.
It's been almost 20 years since we started doing fungicide applications regularly in cornfields. And I know some of the farmers are going, is this what it is these days? Do I have to put a fungicide on to make this corn grow?
Katie, I don't think you have to spray every acre every single year, but it goes back to having a plan. Look, if you still do quite a bit of tillage, you're bearing residue, if you're focused on selecting hybrids that have really good overall disease resistance, maybe you don't plan on doing a fungicide on that acre. But again, it's about having a plan. If you're not focused on all those other things to reduce disease levels, then you probably do need to plan on using a fungicide application. When I think about where's it going to pay year in and year out, no-till, continuous corn, regardless of tillage, corn-soybean rotation, when you have limited tillage, you need to, in that case, you need to be thinking about the hybrid resistance if you're not going to apply a fungicide. But again, it's all about having a plan. And if your plan is to use fungicides in 2026, you need to be talking to our agronomy field advisors so we can get you the best price on the fungicide. We can get you the product that you want with multiple modes of action, because the best fungicides tend to disappear relatively rapidly. So again, it's all about having a plan.
Let's
That's
spend
my
a minute
opinion.
talking about that, the best fungicides. Phil, you helped me with the blog earlier this summer. We talked about different modes of action, which is different but similar with herbicides. What are we after when we're trying to target these tar spots in southern rust with these fungicides?
Yeah, and some of it's, I would say, from a lot of the data you see out there, the newer modes of action make a difference too. So we've got primarily in agriculture fungicides, we have group 3s, group 7s, group 11s. Those 3 modes of action. And in the past, you said 20 years ago, we had, azoxystrobin,
yeah.
quilts, then we got Quilt Excel, and then, we added more than just a group 3 and a group 11. So it's obviously, as we've used fungicides more and more, and a lot of these have, huge spore producers. That's, it's not like a weed. Weeds throw up thousands or hundreds of thousands of seeds. Spores are millions. So yes, the resistance management part is very important. That's why when I hear, the come back to cost and things like that, you got to remember, okay, the cheaper ones are usually the older products and less modes of action.
And have been used more
And
historically.
have been used a lot more. So the pressure on those diseases to get around that, and Mother Nature always does, is a lot higher. So the ones that show the highest return, especially this year from all the data that I've seen, is the ones with 3 modes of action. So yeah, having that at least 2, if not 3 in there, most of the ones that performed the best this year had 3 modes of action in them. So.
Jake, we did a lot of research.
We did?
A lot of it was hard to get a hold of you sometimes because you guys were just in the field.
I still haven't got through all of it yet.
Yeah,
I haven't
we're
got
still
all the data
digging
yet.
our way
Yeah.
through all
The
the data.
research or your phone calls?
Both, yeah. But we've had this now focus on what we're calling yield enhancement products or YEP products. Give us a quick rundown. Which ones worked? Which
Yeah.
application timing worked? What did you see in the research from this 25 growing season as we make decisions for 26? What don't we want to miss in the tank?
Yeah, so I think it's really important that if you want to know more, and you should want to know more, go back to the research review Lead Academy session. So hopefully we can put that link in here, because I go into a lot more detail about these products in general. But just in brief, we're testing a lot of what I call these non-traditional type products, and they're really simple studies. The question is, if you're going to apply a post-emergence herbicide pass in corn, which many of us do, is there something you can add in the tank that's going to enhance yield or protect yield? That might be a better term, actually. And a lot of the products I tested show no ROI, right? And that's why we test products. There are a couple products, I'm going to reference one in corn that really stood out. Relief OS is a product that really stood out at that application timing. And if you want to know a lot more about Relief OS and what it is, I encourage you to go back and watch that video.
Or call your Liqui-Grow agronomy field advisor.
Or better yet, call your agronomy field advisor. In soybean, at that post-herbicide application time, and as we talked earlier, everybody's pretty much doing that application, or should be. We had Tor sulfur that looked pretty good, and this is over 6 locations. And then what? Polyamine pack. That was kind of the standout product in my mind. Polyamine pack. There's 6 sites, or actually there's 9 sites in total now. That product increased yield at every single site that I've applied it at. I mean, it might only have been a bushel at one of those 9 sites, but it was up to as much as 4.5 bushel at another site. So not huge yield increases, but very consistent yield increases, and it definitely ROIs. I wouldn't be talking about it if it didn't.
When Jake says a site, just to kind of clue some people in here, and I say this on all the videos, but one site might be one location, but there's 8 or 10 replications at each location. So we have multiple replications at each site to add up to 500, we said on the last video, of all these different types.
A lot of data points. I mean, and Phil knows, and I know everybody knows, but I take the research that I do very seriously. In fact, I've told people that if we're not going to do research right, we're not going to do it. Which means lots of locations and lots of replications, and we're trying to control and make sure we're doing a lot better job than comparing this half of the 80 to that half of the 80. I mean, I can tell you for sure we're doing a better job than that. So, on-farm testing, great, but I put a lot of work into making sure that I'm doing a good job.
And Jake, you've tested not only post herbicide applications, but foliar or in-furrow applications, applications with fungicides. I don't think we want to get into all of those today, but work with your agronomy field advisor to make sure if you're thinking about adding a product to an application, it's one that's been tested, it's one that's been vetted, it's one that we truly believe will work on your farm operation, and get the best advice from a party who's done this research, so you don't have to do it yourself.
And Abby, one of the things that I really appreciate about working here is, we're not tied to any individual company. We have lots of different partner companies that we work with, and we're just testing their products, and we want to know which ones work in our geography. I don't necessarily have an opinion about whose products we sell. I just want to make sure we're selling the products that have the best likelihood of working effectively, right?
Absolutely.
And I'll also tell you that when it comes to these YEP products, and I guess everything in general, I can't guarantee you, and nobody can. If somebody is guaranteeing you, then that would be my first sign to walk away. But I can't guarantee you that any of these products are going to work for you. What I am doing and what we're trying to do, Phil and I, is point you in a direction that is most likely to work on your operation, right? I mean, at some point, you as a grower and you as an AFA do have to do your own, I encourage you to do your own trialing work. It's just that, but when I say that, do a good job of it. And if you want to know what that means, do a good job. Get a hold of Phil and I will help you do a good job. But the bottom line is there are hundreds of products out there. Abby, you showed that one biological sheet.
That was just the companies too. That wasn't the brands with it.
Yeah, not the product.
Most companies have 40 products under that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of these things out here, guys and gals, and we're doing the best we can to narrow them down into a direction where we've seen some good things, and we encourage you to try these products based on the things we've seen. Not that it's a guarantee, because there is no guarantees in agronomy, but it is a direction that we strongly believe in. All right, so in addition to the YEP products for the post herbicide application timings, let's talk a little bit about some other products that I believe, based on my research and talking to other colleagues in the industry, that are worthwhile for the BT/R3 application, the fungicide application in corn and soybean. So again, this is another video we can link in, but I sat down and talked with Syngenta biological product manager. I think the product manager for North America, I believe. But we can link that in, and we had a long conversation about how Syngenta Biological is developing these biological / non-traditional products, and the technology that they're using today to do this. So, we're not just mixing stuff in the bathtub. I mean, not even close. They're using genomics, and genomics is basically the study of how, plants change their pathway given responses to the environment, or maybe it's a application of a product. But the bottom line is they're using some cutting edge technology to understand how these different compounds work. And Yield On and or Full Scale, they're very similar products with very similar active ingredients. That's a product that I tested in soybean at 3 locations, and we definitely had profitable ROI with Yield On and Full Scale. And that makes sense because they're very similar products. Now, I tested other products too and didn't have very consistent results and or ROI at that timing. So again, if you're gonna apply something with your fungicide pass, in my opinion, Yield On and or Full Scale would be the product to use.
That was a great video that we did this summer.
It was really good.
10 years ago, we were talking about not mixing so much in the bathtub, but just grinding up seaweed and hoping it worked and putting it in a jug, and it stunk terribly bad, and you'd spray it.
Yep.
And so to see how far they've come from that to this genomics and the science behind it, it was pretty neat, and put a lot more belief in my own mind. I'm probably one of the first to say, no, we're not going to waste time and money on some of this stuff.
I mean, you can literally apply a product in a greenhouse and then map what pathways that those products are affecting. And we know in general what pathways should be upregulated or downregulated to increase yield in general, right? And so we are in a different place on what we can do.
Also, the consistency of yield results, that's just not something we've seen in the past. And so when all the stars align and we have these great growing seasons to kind of grab some more of this yield, protect some of this yield on some of these products, it's pretty fun to work with you guys. We'll say, hey, we heard about this product. Jake will say, oh, hell, we've been testing that for 10 years. Glad you're finally with us, Katie. And I said, okay, yeah, sorry.
And to your point, Katie, Jake did test some new products that at this point don't have label or are not sold in the market. So we'll have data on new products that we'll be launching in the future. So
yes, don't put it past Jake to bring a 2.5-gallon jug from a guy's pickup truck through the doors and then tell Abby, this stuff works, better figure out how to get it in a tank,
And where to buy it. From the guy in the pickup truck.
Yeah. It's probably because the guy in the pickup truck knows what he's talking about. And I can tell.
Pass up a good opportunity.
So, that kind of gets us through those yield enhancing products. And, then we start to see the days get a little shorter and we're starting to get ready for harvest. Can we talk a little bit about 2025 and the harvest that we saw?
I would say, I can talk, yeah. I would say, we had an outstanding soybean year. I'm kind of a soybean guy, so it's fun to occasionally have a good year, Unfortunately, people are always frustrated. It's like, corn had some challenges with disease and so forth. So we were probably more on average, in this area, maybe slightly above, depending where you're at. But soybeans, I'd say in general for our region, were exceptional. I saw disease. I thought things were going to maybe go south. It just didn't materialize, and conditions were right, and we got a lot of pods. We had moisture that carried us through, and we had really good pod set, and I think really big beans, which guys that have grown beans and grown seed beans understand that adds a lot of yield when you can finish them off strong, get the moisture to them, and finish moving stuff to the beans. It makes a big difference in yield. So
I want to pause on that really quick. So coming from the seed world, should we be concerned about our bean size for 2026 for planting purposes?
Yeah.
Are they going to be big beans?
The thing is that there's still genetics related to that too. So some beans can get larger than others, and I can tell you that there's some beans that you always had to watch out for. But I wouldn't say in general you need to worry about it. There are some planters that do a little better with larger sizes than others, I will say. Not picking on anybody, but yeah, we could potentially have in some of those varieties could be larger beans, but I wouldn't say.
Yeah, and I would say in general, the reports I seen, we had more seed number and in general heavier beans. So I don't think we're going to have an extraordinary large bean problem in 26.
Good question.
Okay, so corn yields were off a little bit. We still had a lot of good corn yields, and it was definitely not as a disaster. But any farmer you talk to will say bean yields were up, corn yields were off the last few years. And then, so the next question is, well, why? What can I do to make my corn yield better next year? And so we've talked a lot about what we can do to make corn yields better next year, but we really haven't answered the question why. So in my opinion, there's a couple things that got us. I think in general, we had a lot more uneven emergence than people thought in general in corn. I think the disease, even if we applied a fungicide, and we had some big yield increases in corn related to fungicide applications, but even then, the fungicide still took the top end off, or the disease still took the top end off, okay? And if you didn't apply a fungicide, you were probably off more than a little bit in 2025. Also, we had some really warm temperatures, particularly warm nights there in late July, early August, and that increased respiration. And if you increase respiration, you take away from net photosynthesis. So there's no doubt in my mind that it was the uneven emergence, it was the foliar diseases, and it was the abnormally warm night temperatures that took the top end off the corn yield. I'm sure there are other factors too, but those are the big three that I think of. And in my personal opinion, that's why corn yields were off.
I would totally agree with that. And I think in some fields there were some pollination issues, maybe not as big as social media made it out to be. But in a lot of those fields I also saw really deep kernels too. So yeah, it was variable depending on where you're at.
Yep.
You know, our Clear Lake area was really tough for corn yields, but some people had some.
Oh yeah, that's the other one. In areas, nitrogen deficiency was a huge issue. Yeah.
Well, guys, that was a really good discussion. I learned a lot about 25 and reviewed, maybe some of the things that I had forgot about the year. But as I think about 26, one of the things to take into account is if I'm going to use a biological or a product, an add-on product, I'm going to use one that we've tested and vetted. That way we don't have to do our own on-farm research. What about you, Phil? What are you going to change in your management style or recommend?
I'm going to be the oddball here, but I'm going to go with residue management. I think it's important every year, but especially this year. There's lots of things you can do on your planter and tillage. That's where I like to mess with, but residue management when it comes to corn or beans this year, like I said, I saw a lot of challenges and even beans with crusting, but there's a lot of things we can do to adjust that, make sure things are ready for the 2026 season, to make sure we don't have emergence issues, and that follows you through the season with carbon to nitrogen ratios. So it can be a booger.
I'm going to glom on because Phil said you need to be ready. And in my personal opinion, so much about being a really good crop manager is about logistics and timing and having a plan. We talked a lot about planning, and you can't be good at anything unless you have a well laid out strategic plan. And that comes back to the side dress application. It comes back to the fungicide applications. The question is, if I'm not going to apply a fungicide, what is my plan to manage foliar diseases in corn and or soybean? Having a plan, some sort of plan, working with your IFA. Is my plan a fungicide? Is my plan tillage? Is my plan selecting a resistant variety? What is my plan? Plan, and then execute. Execute the plan.
Boy, Jake, I couldn't say any better than that. So with that being said, we hope that you had a wonderful 2025 on your own farm. We look forward to working with all of you in 2026. If you have any questions, reach out to your AFA, your agronomy field advisor. And thanks so much for tuning in to this week's Lead Academy.
Lead Academy.
Liqui-Grow
Excellence
And agronomy
development.